Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Rodcast. I've got another extra special guest today who last came on the show back in March 2020, so almost 4 years ago now. It is Mr. Paul Higgs from Millbank Academy. Paul, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, mate. Not bad at all.
So last episode, which was episode 15, like I said, back in March 2020, Paul came on the show, told us about his fantastic career in housing, coming from Barratt Homes, land assembly, all that sort of stuff. So please go back to episode 15, have a listen to that. But yeah, we're not going to go talk about kind of your previous career, but what I do want to talk about is what you've been up to in the last 4 years.
Welcome to the Rodcast with Rod Turner, the show all about real estate. We discuss everything that affects asset-backed businesses, investments, and go deep into the details with some of the best in the business.
Well, look, it's been a funny 4 years, isn't it? I can't remember. So when was it we last did this?
So it was March 2020, and I remember because we did it in that hotel by the fire. I don't know if you remember, it was a while ago.
I do remember, yeah.
We had a good old chat, yeah.
So that was obviously, I get so confused with the whole lockdown and thing. Yeah. It's been crazy, isn't it? So that would have been before lockdown, was it?
Just before. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that was a bit weird, wasn't it, for a couple of years? So what have I been up to? Well, look, same as ever, land planning and development deals, and you know, I've always got and always had things at all different stages in the pipeline. So there's always something, you know, just been signed up, just been finished, halfway through or whatever. Luckily enough, actually, was I building anything? I don't think, I wasn't actually in the middle of building anything during the lockdown. So that was, I guess, quite handy, although building didn't actually get affected as much as a lot of things, obviously. Yeah. Obviously, I've got a training business as well. So my, 80% of the time, Millbank Group, I'm a developer. 10 years ago, a bit more now actually, I started a property development training business, Millbank Land Academy. And of course, that all had to stop because we used to do live training and it was probably sort of like, we used to do sort of like one thing a month. That all stopped, but we had a load of people booked up, still interested. So during that period, we went into a studio and recorded it all, so it's all online digital. So that's one of the things I've been doing since. And then I can't remember. Yeah, one of my projects was just about to get planning. Obviously, I didn't know that at the time because it was at appeal, right? So you never know which way it's going to go.
I think we might have briefly touched on it in the last episode. Was this the one with the chicken coops?
Yeah. It was old agricultural stuff.
Yeah.
So remind me what had happened? Had I just got it, or was I waiting for it?
So I think you hadn't got the planning yet.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I mean that was a long-term deal, right?
Sure.
So before I came along, that one had a 35-year history of planning refusals. So touch wood, I've still got 100% planning track record. I've never ultimately not got planning, right? But a lot of them I've had to win at appeal. So possibly that one at the time we might have been waiting for the appeal decision to come through. So anyway, so that came through. Obviously it was all a bit of a slow start because of the lockdown stuff, but got geared up for that, built it, just finished it now actually. So that's probably the main thing I've been working on the last couple of years is building that.
And that was on the Greenbelt, wasn't it? Because that was part of the issue of how it went to appeal.
It was. So the site's Greenbelt, and it's also designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty, albeit it was literally covered, it was defunct and covered in horrible old buildings and had been for like 30 odd years. But nevertheless, doing stuff in the Greenbelt is super difficult, although this certainly wasn't what most people would imagine Greenbelt to be.
Mm. And so, tell us, what was it like? Because when I think of Greenbelt, I imagine most people think of Greenbelt, they think of lovely green meadows and fields and things we don't want to spoil. And add to that area of outstanding beauty, you think, oh God, this is going to be picturesque, but it wasn't like that at all.
No. And it's interesting actually. So, I'm certainly not your archetypal greedy developer. I'm actually really into looking after the environment. I'm really into nature and stuff like that. So I don't think you should be building on, chopping down trees and building on farms and fields, which is what most people imagine Greenbelt to be.
Sure.
And there is a lot that's like that, but not all of it. So this site, for example, was 80% covered in buildings, hard standing, old sheds that had all, basically become dilapidated and defunct. So it's sort of lain there bare with nothing happening for years and years and years, and needed tidying up and sorting out, because one of the key tests for stuff in the Greenbelt is about the openness. Now, this site wasn't very open at all. It was a real eyesore, and remember, it was an area of outstanding natural beauty as well. So, but nevertheless, just because of those planning designations, it was still sort of a non-starter. Hence, before me, there had been 8 planning refusals over a period of 35 years.
Wow.
So, that's one of the reasons I quite liked it to start with, because I knew it was going to be a challenge. I wanted to sort of test myself a bit. I knew it needed to be something a bit special in order to hopefully win planning. And eventually it did.
So what made your scheme special enough to win at appeal where others before you hadn't?
Yeah. So one of the things that most developers do wrong is that sort of like one size fits all.
Sure.
They sort of try to do the same thing all the time. And they're not detailed enough. They're not strategic enough. A lot of them, I don't think they really just don't really care enough. So, as always, you've got to have a really good team. We had really good architects, really good planning consultants. And between us all, we came up with a proposal that basically got rid of almost 70% of the stuff that was there. So we massively cleaned up the site. And then we just built 3 new super sustainable houses that were largely sitting on the footprints of the buildings that were there already. They were all, and also they're very similar volume. So these things, when you see pictures of them, they're all funny shapes and sizes and angles. They look like agricultural buildings. Mm-hmm. So basically the crux of the argument was, well, look, it's not going to look too much different to what was there originally, with the exception of they're going to be nice new, brand new residential buildings rather than falling down agricultural buildings. And we're getting rid of 60, 70% of all of the rubbish that was there, and we're rewilding it and we're landscaping, and we're actually making it how the Greenbelt and areas of outstanding natural beauty should be. Because
I can't remember who did this study, but they were looking at the Greenbelt, and they found that 13% of the Greenbelt is actually not the meadows and farms that we think it is. It's areas like this, and it's even car parks and things like that are right for building on, and in great locations and near kind of transport and all that kind of stuff. So definitely the Greenbelt is not what maybe the media portrays it as.
Exactly.
What you talked about, kind of you've brought it back to, you've essentially made it green. Talk to us about the design behind that and the construction methods in which you were able to do that.
Yeah, so, like this year is my 40th year in development, yeah? So I, as you know, started off very small, long time ago, just doing refurbs, built up really big, was head of land at Barratt's, biggest developer in the country. So I worked for PLC developers for 10 years and managed to escape that 20 plus years ago now. So, I've done a lot of stuff in my career, and now really I just want to do things differently. I want to support and encourage new developers, because loads of them have disappeared over the last, interestingly, the year I built my first new build house, which was 1988, was the peak of SME developers. Since then, it got increasingly difficult and they've all disappeared, yeah? So I want to, it's one of the reasons for starting the training business, right? I want to support and encourage more developers to learn how to do things the right way. So, so I'm not just into building and developing, I'm into like doing good stuff and things like that. So, which is one of the reasons I really like this site to start with, because it was going to be an interesting challenge. And so the focus was on, clever design, incorporating the nature, bringing in new nature, and also something called biophilic design, which you may or may not have heard of, which is to do with the connection and the connectedness between people and nature, because that massively increases wellness, right?
So is that just touching on the biophilic stuff? Is that things like what can help it's sort of nature human kind of connection? So it could be things like fresh air, outlook, seeing water, seeing plants, life, all that sort of
totally.
Yeah.
I'll take like an extreme analogy just to sort of make the point. Yeah, you can imagine, thousands of years ago, when you're living in your cave or your wooden hut with your sort of like family in the forest, and it's all next to the stream, and your fire and the sunset at night and the sunrise in the morning. It's you feel good, right? It's a bit like when you go on a little camping holiday or whatever, right? People feel nice, feel better in nature, right? It nurtures us, yeah? Conversely, you imagine you live in the centre of Hong Kong in a studio flat, the environment massively affects us, yeah? So that's the sort of overarching concept of it all. So it's lots of natural light, natural materials, organic shapes, basically making people feel as much as possible like they're in nature.
Yeah.
It's the air conditions. For example, we've got all zero VOC paint, so there's no nasty chemicals in stuff. So because all of this stuff subtly affects people, and for most of us, it's around us all the time, so they're not even aware of it, yeah? But, if and when you can get all of the good stuff into a development and into design, people just feel much better, they're healthier, they're happier.
Well, it's like, I know for me, if I get outside in the daytime in some sunlight, fresh air, just going for a walk, I feel much better.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that, rather than if I'm cooped up in the office. So I can imagine if you're living somewhere that embodies that, it's going to help with, keeping everyone in a good mood.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's ancient woodland immediately. So one of the houses, the whole corner opens up, so the windows go back one way and go back though, so that you've got like a hanging corner. You're sitting in your living room, they all got open, proper wood burning fires. You're looking straight into the ancient woodland. There's deers running around in the garden. It's just little internal atriums with lots of plants in there. It's just all good stuff, really.
And what was the driving force behind that? Was that you going, I want to do a biophilic design, or was it, well, this is really a planning issue, and if we want to get through planning, we need to do it this way, or was it something else?
So, look, like I said earlier, now I'm just interested in doing good stuff and hopefully, proving that there's a better way of doing stuff, right? So part of it was me. Part of it was certainly the planning. It was the planning argument was the thing that really won the planning. Was having buildings that sat on similar footprints and shapes and sizes and volumes. So
you weren't expanding the massing kind of thing.
Exactly. If anything, we were actually massively reducing the massing.
Fantastic,
and we were getting rid of all the hard standing. There was nearly £250,000 worth of knotweed, Japanese knotweed. That's a whole nother story. But so like it's I guess the layout and the principle of design was the thing that swung us to planning.
Sure.
But all of the sort of other stuff was, the building with nature, certainly the biophilic design. No one forced us to do that, but it all nicely lent itself with the overall concept of the scheme,
Yeah. Well, so you're taking the opportunity and you're giving what the best fit to make it work, I guess, aren't you? Yeah. And how did you find, like, going back to that Greenbelt element, we hear a lot in the media about this Greenbelt. How do you think the reality of dealing with the Greenbelt how was it compared to how it's represented by government in planning? Because we hear about is it NPFF or NFPF or whatever
NPPF,
it's called? That's the one. And there's a lot of talk in there about the Greenbelt. I mean, how do you find the reality of working on a scheme like this? Obviously, it took a long time to get the planning and things like that. What barriers do you think are up against developers. And do you think the government and the NPPF is realistic in what it's kind of put out there?
I think the problem is certainly, the last 3 years. I'm gonna say. I mean, planning's been getting increasingly worse. I mean, it's literally been the worst that it's ever been. And I've got to say, it's been an up and down, and that's what happens. Get different governments in and out. Sometimes it's a bit easier. Sometimes it's a bit harder. There have been times in the past when it's been crazy hard. But now it's just ridiculous for all sorts of reasons, largely political, actually. So all of the stuff that's been done, some of the changes that have been made in the new NPPF, they're clearly they're not about getting housing created. They're about votes. Yeah. So saying that there will be no more building on the Greenbelt and everything's got to be brownfield. Well, that sounds great, doesn't it? Right? But look, and like I say, I'm not for chopping down trees or building on fields, but all Greenbelt's not like that, as we've just discovered.
Said, 13%.
So the problem is there's not really. The government aren't listening to people that are actually at the coalface trying to do it, and of course there are developers that sort of don't care and they would chop down trees. And they would build all over the country, and they're just focused on the money. I've got to tell you, there's not actually that many like that, really. They're nowhere near as bad as public perception might have it.
It's a bit like public perception of landlords, isn't it? It's similar. It's like we need a new PR team, don't we?
Yeah, it is similar. And as I said, that's one of the reasons I started doing the training, really, to actually convince people and persuade people, developers, actually, look, there is a better way of doing this. And this is the thing. So the sooner we can all be seen to be doing things the right way, and at the end of the day, because it's largely developers that build the houses, right? And we've got a massive housing problem, and of course we need more houses. The sooner people can start understanding that not all developers are arseholes, and that some of them are trying to do the right thing, and more of them do learn to do the right thing, and we all start working together collaboratively, then the better it will be for everyone.
Well, I think one of the issues is we want to encourage developers to develop. So you've got to kind of have a carrot, haven't you, to encourage investment into development and things like that. I mean, in Scotland, where they had kind of rent freezes, you had all these build-to-rent schemes that suddenly pulled out of developing. These new houses because they went, oh, no, we don't want to do it. So it's thinking about, well, what's going to encourage investment into development? What's going to encourage more? Because at the moment, there's too many barriers up that are stopping people do that.
There really are. So, I mentioned earlier, there's numerous surveys been done over the years by the HBF, the Federation of Master Builders, the NHBC, all the sort of leading bodies within the house building industry, into the biggest barriers of growth to developers of all sizes, and it's always land and planning, and it's been getting worse. So more, and as it gets harder, just more and more of them, it makes it hard for new people to come in, and all of the people that are in it, many of them, certainly when you start getting to my age, you do seriously think about giving up.
You mentioned kind of the planning system. How do you think over the last sort of 5 years, let's say, how do you think it's affected the build of new homes, and what can be done to increase the building?
Well, the biggest problem is the lack of resourcing in the planning system. Yeah, so not enough people in planning departments, full stop, and certainly not enough good people.
But why would you when you can go into private practice?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I mean, is there's no encouragement, is there?
If I could do one thing to help improve things, I would throw tons of money at planning departments, make them the highest paid planners in the industry to really encourage all the best people to go there.
And encourage growth within the department, because you've got to see, well, if I go into council planning, what's my career progression? Because at the moment, I think people look at it and go, well, I'll do 2 years as a town planner there, and then I'll bugger off to
that is the
private
typical
practice
plan. Go
and
and get a bit of local authority experience, then go somewhere else. But of course, it is a big problem because of course local authorities, they've got all sorts of pay structures and stuff like that, and it's not an easy one. I mean, in actual fact, a lot of people would complain about this, but sort of outsourcing it to the private sector would make a big difference. And
I mean, apart from then the resources in the planning department, what else is a barrier to new homes being built at the moment? Is it, I mean, there's always been a lot of complaints about our planning rules and regulations. And when you compare it to, I don't know, places like the States where it's more kind of zonal and it's very binary, it's either you can do it or you can't. Here, there's so much grey area, and it's why I heard a stat the other day which amazed me, which was something like, of those schemes that go to appeal, it was something like 80% win, but so many cases that are withdrawn or pull out don't bother going to appeal because they don't kind of think they're going to get there. It just amazed me. I thought it's crazy that there's so much kind of grey area about planning, isn't there?
Well, look, right. So I may or may not have mentioned, I don't think I talked about this last time, the key, if I had to pick one key little bit of legislation, right, in all the planning law, it would be section 38.6 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, right? It basically says, and this is about the grey area, right? Planning decisions must be made in accordance with the development plan, right? So you've got to do exactly what the rule book says, unless other material considerations indicate otherwise, right? But that's actually really good, right? Because, if you can't, every site is different, every situation is different, the stuff changes, right? So so that actually gives a lot of leeway for tweaking things, changing things a bit, right? So believe it or not, right? I actually think the UK planning system is largely really good. Actually, it gives third parties and local people a chance to, put their case forward. It gets debated. It's not like some other countries where you just go and do what you want and you don't care about how it affects other people, right? So it's actually really good, in my opinion, when it's left alone for long enough. Part of the problem is, all successive governments coming in, tweaking it, changing it. All of this talk about the planning system is broken. It needs a wholesale rethink. It doesn't really. Yeah, of course, there's loads of stuff that could be done to make it better, but even if you just left it alone for long enough, we, developers, house builders, could make it work.
So it's about consistency. It's about being able to know where we all stand and then playing within the rules of that. Because at the moment, I mean, I'll give you an example. We've got something in appeal at the moment, and we thought we were absolutely away with it, and then the council contacted us a week before decisions due to tell us actually they're adopting a new emerging plan, which states something different, which totally kind of ruined it. But it's things like that make it so difficult for us to be able to get such, because it's a long-term process, isn't it, getting planning and building out and things like that.
It is, but what I would say is when you know, you've been in it a long time and you really know how it works, a lot of it is about foreseeing all of that bullshit, because to be honest, what you've just told me isn't a surprise, right? That's not the first time it's ever happened, right? So knowing all of the stuff that might happen and having an A, B, C, D, this business is basically, in a lot of ways, it's like 10-dimensional chess. Seriously, right? Because there's a lot of different moving parts and all the rest of it. So as I mentioned earlier, right, the problem with most developers of all sizes is they think it's one size fits all, and they just sort of like try to do the same thing all the time. They don't really think about, well, what if this, what if that, and all the rest of it. So, but nevertheless, it isn't easy. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. We're just going to have a quick break while we run through to our sponsor. So Paul, what advice would you give to SME developers at the moment trying to navigate the planning system, trying to invest in sites? Obviously there's a lot of challenges for them at the moment. What advice and tips would you give them?
Well, I'm trying not to say you need
Go
to
mill
do
back.
my training. You need to do my training, obviously. But I mean, oh God, you do need to know how the system really works, right? And it is like 10-dimensional chess. It really is. The reason you can potentially make a lot of money is because it's high risk, high reward, and complicated. Yeah. So it really isn't the sort of thing you should get into lightly. Look, the reason I went to work for PLC's house builders for 10 years is not because I wanted to. I was developing, sort of doing smaller stuff for almost 10 years, realised how much I didn't know. There was no way to really learn in those days. So I went to university part-time, studied land economics, all with a view to getting a job with a house builder so I could get the experience I needed, right? Didn't want to work for a PLC corporate world, it's not my thing, but I needed the experience. So one way or another, you have got to learn what needs to be done. The alternative is that you learn the slow, painful, expensive way by trial and error. And in this business, it's like too high risk, too high reward, really, to do that, right?
And that's shown by the amount of developers that go bust. I mean, which is colossal.
Look, I saw an advert the other day that really pissed me off, actually. And obviously, look, it's someone trying to sell a course or whatever, and it basically said, blah, 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 blah. Have you ever seen a poor developer? Yeah, like nearly all of them all the time, right? Because this is what happens. So,
caviar and champagne for a week and then beans on toast for the rest of the year.
New people come into the industry, don't really know how it works, get involved. If the market's going up, it basically gets them out of the shit, and all of their mistakes are sort of hidden, and they think they're geniuses. They do a slightly bigger one, bigger one, until the market goes flat or down, and then it's shit. It wasn't a good deal. It was only the market that was doing it. Then they go bust. Then they disappear, and that's the end of them. And then the new wave come through.
Then it's Forex trading.
But basically, really, for a lot of them, it's not really clever development. It's just speculation.
Yeah.
But they don't realise that that's what they're doing. And that's why there aren't really that many developers that have been around long term.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. I think the whole thing about high risk, you've got a lot of capitals needed. And what we always say is, look, prove the concept before you scale up. But the problem is people go and again, the PR around this, the media, whenever you think of a developer, you always think of someone who's got loads of money, don't you? Of course you do, because high rewards, but you forget about that high amount of risk. And at the moment, I mean, we're seeing home builders, especially in the medium size of the market, going under at the fastest rate in history.
Yeah.
Construction companies going under. It's all linked as well. The most amount of construction companies going bust at the moment that there's been on record. It's up 43% from pre-pandemic levels. I mean, it's insane. So I do think people need to approach with caution the whole kind of development world. Going into talking about your project that you've just that we've been discussing. Talk us through the timeframes for that, because I think it's good to manage some of the audience's expectations on how long some of these things can actually take to come to fruition. And if you're buying sites and then hoping to get planning and then hoping to build out, and you're putting capital into that, I mean, you might think, 20% margin, but if that's taking you 6 years to do, it's not a great investment, is it?
Yeah. Well, look, I almost don't want to tell you about the timescales on this one because it is so extreme, and this is the worst ever. So I will tell you, but it's the period. It's always long, right?
Yeah.
But this is not typical. So this site was basically introduced to me by someone 10 years ago. Yeah. So remember that the landowner had it for years. They'd had 8 planning refusals. they knew or hoped that it might have some potential at some point, but they'd spent 35 years getting refusals, right? So it was, to be honest, no one else really fancied it. I don't know if that many people could have ever done it, right? So that was it. So as a result, but the landowner was emotionally attached to it. It was their only chance of making a few quid, of course, which they wanted to do. Someone introduced the site to me. I've obviously got a bit of a reputation of being good at this stuff. So it then took quite a long time to negotiate and agree the deal. Yeah? So that probably from start to sort of signing, probably a couple of years, right? Now, which is extreme, right? It's not always like that, yeah? Then, of course, we had to work up the planning. So there was a lot of time doing surveys and coming up with ideas and reports and all the rest of it. And one of the things, I've reverse engineered everything I've done, everything I've learned over my 40 years now, and into a step-by-step system to make it easy to explain and teach other people, yeah? And there's a bit in the middle about getting the best planning permission that starts with coming up with your planning strategy. And like I said earlier, right, it's always different. It's horses for courses. What I do on one site, I wouldn't do on another site, etc. So we had to come up with a very specific planning strategy, which on this one included, because I based on the planning history of that site, right, the odds on it was going to get refused, right? I mean, the 8 schemes before us, 35 years, had all been refused, right? Largely because of the Greenbelt and AONB designation, and also because it was in Chiltern District Council, who are notoriously anti-development, right? So it was almost odds on you were never going to negotiate it. You're going to have to end up at appeal. Nevertheless, part of our overall strategy was trying to negotiate it and trying to be seen to negotiate it, so that if and when we end up at appeal, the appeal inspector will hopefully like what we propose, like the way we've done it, see that we really were trying to do everything we can to negotiate it, and sadly, we couldn't. We ended up, here it is with you, Mr. Inspector. What do you think? Yeah. So it was a slow planning process for that reason. So it was pre-app and another pre-app and another pre-app and tweaking it a little bit, and then planning application, which
costs money as well.
It all costs money. It all costs money. I mean, just So that was a good. That was 200. Not far off. Getting towards £300,000 overall from start to finish. Yeah, in terms of like fees, appeals, specialist reports. I mean, you would not believe. Well, you would. The amount of stuff that you have to submit now, right? I mean, I've got to say, particularly for people that are sort of like new or whatever, I don't want to get them to think that it's all like that, because this is extreme.
But I do think, I mean, like you can take a fairly bog standard kind of new build. I mean, what I think a lot of people that are new to it don't realise is how many reports and specialists you need to get sort of written reports from and pay them for that. I think they think, planning consultant and architect, away we go. And that's just not the case. There's a lot of other reports, daylight, sunlight, energy, heritage. I mean, the list is endless depending on the site. So I think it is important to kind of go through that.
Yeah, it is. So anyway, so it took a long time to get planning. And then, of course, we had COVID and lockdown in the middle, which sort of like, so whilst luckily enough for me, and that one, I wasn't in the middle of building it on site, all the consultants and everyone else that you need and stuff like that, none of them are working, because certainly if you remember to start with, everyone was liking it, having a nice little holiday before it all got really weird, yeah? So we were sort of stuck in probably 2 years in the middle when things were all a bit weird and not a lot could happen. We then had to tender it, we had to do the detailed design.
What about kind of getting discharge of conditions where there's some onerous
I mean, that's the other massive one. All of that stuff takes time. It was a super complicated build. I mean, most people will tell you about the cheapest thing you can build is like a rectangular box in a green field. Yeah.
No right angles on your building.
We couldn't be further away from that. I mean, I was at a NHBC conference about 9 months ago on all the sort of like technical issues and dealing with defects and stuff like that. and there was this guy doing this sort of little talk about the 10 things to be avoided at all costs, and we literally got all of them. but because that's nothing else. Rectangular box would never have got planning.
Yeah. So it's kind of planning led on that side to force it. But so once you then...
Sorry, mate. Actually, just one really important thing to mention as well, of course. So over the last 2.5 years, as a result of Ukraine, Brexit, all sorts of other stuff, build costs have gone up more in that period than they have at any other period since the Second World War. Yeah. So we were in the middle of all of that. So I was like constantly value engineering stuff. There was materials you had designed in you just couldn't get anymore. Yeah. So I was constantly tweaking things, changing things, value engineering things, looking at things to do things in a cheaper, quicker way. So it was a crazy time as well.
And so once you got kind of permissions, you got conditions discharged, and you actually got onto site. What happened then? Talk us through the timeframes of once you were on site. So getting to site, or getting the planning, that was the first stage, and that clearly took a few years. Then being able to start on site from getting that initial kind of winning appeal. How long did that take to discharge those conditions and be ready and tender and all that kind of stuff?
Well, because of the pit, that was probably 18 months.
Yeah, okay.
Because we wanted it had to be done the right way. You know?
And then, so once you then get to
site... I should add, really important thing to add here. Because it was such a risky deal, it's a JV with a landowner. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you wouldn't have wanted... you would have been mad to buy that site.
Yeah.
Because it had such a big question mark over it, yeah. So and of course the landowner wanted to stay in the deal so that he could share in the upside. In the upside. So.
And so, what was then the time? So, once 18 months to start on site, and then how long's it been on site for? Because obviously there's a lot of complexities that you've gone through. It's not as simple as kind of get the bricklayers in, get the roof on, and all that.
So it was super detailed design.
Yeah.
That the site was contaminated. There was a whole load of demolition. I told you there was £250,000 worth of Japanese knotweed that had to be, dealt with in a very specific way. The foundations are piled. We got massive open spans, so it had to be steel frame. We were going to do it in SIPs just about a start, and you can't get SIPs anymore for a period of time. They just weren't making them. It's like a whole,
the factories have gone bust, haven't they? That was the problem.
You got factories shut. You got all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. So it really was crazy time. So actually, getting on for 20 months overall the build.
That's not too bad, to be honest. Because of the size of these buildings, they're not small.
There's no way you would have got them done quicker.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Fantastic. And so the end result is these fantastic, and we'll try and get a picture on the video for this, but these fantastic kind of grand design-esque kind of houses that you've got. How have the numbers been on that? Is this been a success in terms of an investment, as well as obviously adding to that community, leaving the community much better than it was when you found it?
Yeah. So well, I'll tell you. So the short answer is we don't know yet, because they're not on the market.
Yeah.
We haven't launched them. So they were sort of finished just before Christmas, like November. Key part of this whole site is the landscaping, it is the nature, yeah? So November's the worst time of year, November, December, even January actually. You don't want to be selling houses, particularly big houses. People are thinking about Christmas, they're not looking to move. And of course, in terms of the nature, it's middle of winter, it was looking at its worst, yeah? So we're gearing up for a launch in the beginning of March, when literally the $1 million question will be, what do we get for them? But they are very unique. They're all net zero. They're the biophilic design. There's actually an organisation now actually called Building with Nature. Now I didn't know they existed before we started. So it was only sort of like halfway through that I discovered there's actually this organisation called Building with Nature, which is trying to encourage developers to build with nature, and they've got this sort of list of stuff that you should do. We were doing it all anyway, right? So that's actually an organisation and something I'm really interested in supporting and encouraging. Particularly if any Greenbelt stuff is to be, developed, then that should be the focus,
And what are some of the things that they're doing to encourage developers? Because I know, like things like you mentioned, kind of net zero. There's funding lines that are cheaper than your typical funding lines for if you can build to a certain kind of energy level and things like that. Not just not just term finance, because there's green deals, but there's also development finance where once you've done it, if you have done to what you say you will, they'll reduce the exit fee and things like that.
Yeah, so, I've got to tell you though, within the scheme of things,
it doesn't make a big enough difference.
It doesn't make a lot of difference. Yet. So the problem is with all of this sustainable stuff, at the moment it still is generally more expensive. A lot of it you've got to do now anyway with new building regs and what have you. But all of this stuff is just making development increasingly expensive. I mean, biodiversity net gain may or may not be something you know about, but that is just about to make things even harder.
I mean, if you look at the headwinds that developers have had, nutrient neutrality, is it happening? Is it not happening? You've had kind of the developers tax that's come in. You've got all the different kind of surveys in there depending on the time of year, like bats and newts and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's the list is endless kind of thing. And it just seems to be getting more and more and more kind of legislation being added to it. It's an incredibly difficult thing, and all these things add costs. So how do you recoup that cost, and what are the government or organisations like the ones you've mentioned, what are they actually doing to encourage kind of more people to do that, and what can they do?
Well, they're not doing anything is the answer, right? And the problem is it's really only sort of developers that are on the front line that really understand the implications of all of this stuff. Because at the end of the day, obviously it's us that's got to make deals work. Yeah, every bit of land has got an existing use value. It's worth whatever it's worth at the moment. Now, particularly if it's got buildings already on it. Yeah, so everything's got an existing use value. In order to incentivise a landowner to sell, they're going to want a bit of a premium over and above that existing use value. Now, how much of a premium is a negotiation, right? But they're going to, they get to the point whereby they're not going to sell it for less than it's worth, right? So our job, of course, of development as developers, name of the game is maximising land values. Yeah, so we've got to come up through clever design and planning. We've got to make the overall pie as big as possible so that there's enough to be shared around between the landowner, giving them beating existing use value and giving us a profit that makes it worth our while in what is an increasingly tricky and risky business, right? So, and then of course, when all of this additional stuff gets chucked in, SIL, Section 106, affordable housing, biodiversity next BNG credits, and there's a ton of other stuff, new building regs. All of this stuff's putting costs up, right? Basically, developers'
Squeezing
margins or land values are just getting squeezed. It's one of the reasons they're all going bust. And the problem is, and look, and don't get me wrong, I told you, not many people know that I'm actually a bit of a hippie, right? Sadly, I haven't got the hair for it. I would have if I did have, But so I'm into all of that stuff. I think it's really important. But at the end of the day, deals just become unviable. So that's one of the reasons we've got a big housing problem, right? Because stuff just doesn't stack up, and it's not going to happen. And the problem is, all of these different people like throwing additional costs and requirements at it have no real understanding of what that means for developers and land values. They all think, I think, that we've got an endless pot of money, and we're all, flying around in private jets or something. I don't know what they think.
I don't know. I mean, call me cynical, but I don't even think they think of that. I think they purely think of what do our voters want to hear, and let's give them what they want to hear. And when, like you say, when people talk about Greenbelt, no, we don't want building on that. Let's make sure that we've put things in place to stop that. And look, everyone wants new homes, but just not next to them, and not on places they don't want. So it's a tough job. We had someone on previously, Richard Berridge from the what was it, a Single Family Rental Association. And he had some great points about kind of institutional money going into building new homes. And one of the things was that actually UK regulation, a lot of these kind of pension funds don't care about UK regulation because they invest globally. So whereas our EPC targets, for example, have been pulled, they actually will still do it to what European and American rules, which are a bit ahead of us, do, because they have to future-proof it because they are global investors. And I just found like all that stuff is quite interesting. It's kind of what they're looking at long term. They're looking at kind of where they can kind of save money by doing that. But it's about attracting investment into the area. And when margins get squeezed, unfortunately, it makes it difficult. When you've got a 4-year political cycle, I think we said for everything China does bad, what they do well is have a really long-term outlook on things. So it's easier. It's a bit like the planning where they're tinkering with everything. Well, you kind of know where you stand. You go, okay, yeah, here's where we go. We can plan for this now. But in the UK, there seems to be a bit of a lack of that.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what's happening? The world's obviously going a bit bonkers, isn't it? And I'll tell you what, on a sort of related note, actually, one of the things that really pisses me off, right, is you know, like I'm not a landlord. I own a few little bits here and there. You know, not really an investor. The only thing I invest in is development stuff, right, and a bit of prop tech stuff. But you know, other than that, I'm not an investor. I'm not a landlord. I haven't got loads of houses or anything like that. But you know, I've got lots of mates that have, and you and stuff. I know the industry, so I sort of know what's happening. And of course, it's all the middle people in the middle that are getting squeezed. And like landlords, a classic example, right? Most of them are just trying to build up a little pension for themselves because you ain't going to get one anywhere else, yeah. And so they've obviously been fucked over something chronic, yeah. Whilst the institutional build to rent sector is sort of taken over, right? And I, you know, it's just more of, you know, the money getting sucked up to whoever or wherever it is, and the people in the middle getting fucked. So at some point, you know, those same people are even going to own all the housing. You know, you can't even have any of that.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's there's definitely some of that, but then it's who owns that? Well, it's all of us in our pensions if we've managed to get one, if we haven't done our own houses. So it kind of, yeah, I take your point. I think the reason it's going in there is because they've got capital, and whereas the small people don't, and so they go, well, I can't, I don't know, chuck £1 million into this because I don't have it, and I can't have a longer term outlook because actually I need money back within 5 years, whereas I don't know, to build something up is going to take 7 years by the time you start getting income out of it and things like that. So
yeah, well, that's absolutely right, and of course all things, you know, like for like. Just looking at, you know, so like build cost is pretty much the same for everyone, right? But of course, where there is a big saving for the massive institutions and your BlackRocks of the world and all the rest of it is money's just so much cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if their kind of debt is, I spoke to a REIT the other day, and their debt over the next 4.5 years is fixed at 2%. Whereas, I mean, God, I'd love that. Yeah. Whereas we can't go out onto the capital markets to get that. So, Paul, you mentioned prop tech there, and you mentioned how you've been involved in that. And I know one of the previous companies was still going, is Land Insight. Talk us through kind of prop tech and why you think that's important and why it's attracted you to that sector.
Yeah, so, well, just to let you know what happened with Land Insight, yeah. So I've been involved in that for 10 years now, actually. It's 2014 that first started, yeah. So right at the very beginning, guys had an idea about coming up with some software to help self-builders, actually it was initially, to find plots of land and the rest of it. obviously they were looking for a bit of a land expert and they were looking for investors. Somehow found me, started talking to me. I could, obviously I know land and planning inside out, so I could see the potential and knew that it was way more than South Builders, yeah. So I knew what it could do or could be made to do, yeah. And actually, initially, I actually didn't want it to exist because I was thinking like, shit, if and when this could, something is created to do what I know something could be created to do, it's going to make it way harder for me, right? But anyway, after a short while, I thought, well, look, it's going to happen at some point anyway, so I might as well be in the middle of it. Yeah, so I did invest. Luckily enough, the guy that came in with me, Simon Murdoch, so I know I'm like the land and planning guy. I know that part of the business inside out. He's a serial investor, bit of a genius, PhD. Sold a company to Amazon like 25 years ago, and became a serial, tech investor ever since. He's done like Shazam, Zoopla, a load of big ones that you'd have heard of. So it was really good. So I think, he sort of thought, well, look, I don't really know anything about land and planning, but this bloke obviously does. And I thought, well, look, I don't know anything about this whole techie investment stuff, but this bloke obviously does. So we sort of both went in. Obviously, the guys running it, pushing it, Andy, Andrew, and Johnny, in particular, CEO, have done amazing, and it's done really, really well. And one of the reasons for that is, of course, is I am the customer. Like what happens with, and now as a result of that, I get involved, I get tapped up quite a lot by the startups and stuff like that, and all of them have got no idea about the sector. Half of them are trying to solve a problem that isn't really the problem because they come from outside the sector and they don't really understand it in enough detail. Obviously I did, because I am the customer, whether it be a one-man band just starting out, because of course that's what I used to be, to Pedland at the biggest developer in the country, because of course that's what I used to be. I literally knew what all of the problems were. So I think that really helped in terms of being able to get it to do Land Insight exactly what it needed to do really quickly. And we were the first.
It was a fantastic product and easy to use for someone who's not techie like me. It was absolutely great.
Yeah, and look, there's obviously competition now. There wasn't really when we started. There's a few other ones, but none of them are as good as us, without a shadow of a doubt. Most of the PLCs use Land Insight, so that's because it is the best. Yeah,
and so what about now? Are you still doing that?
Yeah, and again, more recently, I got approached by someone with something that did interest me, and same again. Actually, they had an idea, which was all right, but again, it wasn't quite right. But I could see how it could be right and what it did need, because of course, again, I know the industry. Yeah, so I've just become the founding investor in something else, which I'm keeping a bit under the radar just at the moment until we have a big announcement. But I think that's going to be really big as well. But it's a large part of it is about helping more sustainable modern methods of construction get out there, and save carbon and help the environment and stuff like that.
And so touching on modern methods of construction, why do you feel that they've struggled over the last few years? Because they clearly have, because loads of factories have gone bust. People, I mean, we did a modular build back in 2014, 2015. It was fantastic. And I'd love to do it probably on every build ever, because there were so many great positives about it. But the negative was it just cost too much. And it's never quite got to the stage where I can go, oh yeah, I can do that again. I can do that again. I can do that again.
Yeah,
so
it's a really good question, right? So there is a massive skills shortage in the construction industry, and that's getting worse. Yeah. So it definitely, we do need modern methods of construction, and things are going that way slowly. But at the moment, the fact of the matter is, most of the time, depending on what it is, traditional construction is cheaper, right? So at the end of the day, remember, you've got to maximise land values, you've got to get the deals done. if something's 5 or 10% more expensive to build, you can't do it that way, right? And with a lot of this super sustainable stuff, modern methods of construction, a lot of it's more expensive, it's not cheaper. Where it can become cheaper, particularly with things like modular, is where getting it up and built and your income in quick is, with the time saving there. So that's why it's big in student accommodation, build to rent, hotels, because the sooner you're up, the sooner you got your income generating, that starts flipping the build cost increase. So it does make sense. So it will change, and that gap is narrowing, but we're not quite there yet. One of the main reasons lots of the Legal and General, ILCA, all the others are going bust, I think, is because a lot of it's to do with the pipeline, and planning actually again. It's not like people talk about, like the car industry. It's not like the car industry. You haven't got something stopping you being able to sell it, apart from the market and prices and stuff like that. I.e. the planning system. So that really, people can't. It's hard to work out your pipeline, right? Sure. So you've got massive investment in big factories, churning stuff out, and then when they've got to stop and they're not churning stuff out, and you've got all of that overhead, like literally you're screwed. And so you've got I guess the end market is not liquid enough, and the other thing is the stuff that they're creating is not flexible enough, because half the time, an X by Y size by Z size box
doesn't work for the planning.
ain't going to work for.
Well, it's why
you've
got to get them in at design stage before it goes into planning to see what you can work, and it's having kind of all the stakeholders in there, because they might say, well, actually, if we get planned for that, it's going to be a pain in the arse to build in that method.
Exactly, and that's a big part of this new thing we've just started up.
Well, I'm excited to hear more in the future. Paul, always a pleasure. Always great to chat to you about everything kind of land and planning. Thanks a lot for coming on. Hope we can have you again soon.
No worries, mate.